This is part 7 in our unit on heredity. As you can see, we're going to cover pages 228 and 229, and the title of today's lesson is Pedigree Analysis. Now, for many students, I think when you say the word pedigree, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe a brand of dog food. You know, there is a dog food called Pedigree. But in the context of genetics, a pedigree is a family tree. It's a chart that shows multiple generations in a family, and it's used by geneticists to track a particular trait as it's passed down from one generation to the next. Whenever you're looking at a pedigree, and we're going to look at several today, it's important to know what the symbols mean. So whenever you see an individual represented as a square, that simply means that that person is male. Females are represented by circles. If the square or circle is blank and not shaded in, that means that particular person does not show whatever trait you're tracking. That person simply did not inherit that trait. However, if the person is shaded in, as this square or this circle are, that means that that person does show the trait that you're interested in. Whenever you see a square and a circle linked by a horizontal line, that's basically called a marriage line that shows a mating between those two individuals. And any offspring that are produced from that couple are going to be shown sort of hanging off a vertical line. So this would indicate a daughter and 3 sons that were born in a family. So I think the quickest way to teach you how to use pedigrees in genetics is just to jump right in and let me just show you one. This is one that I drew, totally fictitious family here, but notice up at the top we have a mom and a dad that have produced 4 children. This is their firstborn, a son, then they had a daughter, another son, and then they had another daughter. So 4 kids in all. And notice 2 of those children have grown up and gotten married and had children of their own. So this son married and produced a daughter, and then this lady here married and they had a son. So we're looking at 3 generations in a family. And normally you would use a pedigree to track a really important trait, like maybe you're interested in a genetic disorder like cystic fibrosis or hemophilia. I think I recently showed you a pedigree from the family of Queen Victoria in England, and we could see how the recessive allele for hemophilia was passed down through the generations. So normally there's some reason why you're really needing to track that trait. In this case, this is not a terribly important trait. It's blood type, but I thought I would start with this just because I know it's something that we're all familiar with. So for every member of this family, I have already indicated the phenotype, and probably if this was a real family, we would not necessarily know every person's phenotype. I mean, not everybody knows their blood type. I know mine is O positive, but a lot of folks don't really know what their blood type is. And so if you were tracking blood type through 3 generations, chances are you're not necessarily going to be able to correctly identify every single person's blood type. But let's just assume that we did know all of this information for 3 generations in this family. The next thing that we might want to figure out is the genotypes of these individuals. So you'll notice I put 2 blank lines underneath each person, and that's so we can go back and try to fill in the genotype of each individual. And that's often a task that you will be asked to do if you see a pedigree on the AP exam. They may pick out one person in a family and they say, okay, what is the genotype of this person? And it's pretty easy to figure it out if you know how to do it. So the first step, always start by filling in the easy genotypes. I call them the no-brainers. And what I mean by that is some of these blanks we can fill in without really any thought at all. They're just automatic. Okay, so I went ahead and filled in every single gene that I know for absolute certain without even really thinking about it. If a person has type B blood, they have to have at least one big IB, right? You know that. They're either big IB, little I, or big IB, big IB. That's the only 2 possibilities. If I know the person has type A blood, they're either big IA, or big IA, little I. But they have to have at least one big IA. So I went through every type A person, I went ahead and put a big IA. If it was a type B person, I went ahead and put a big IB. And obviously this person, we know both of the genes, right? Because if you have AB blood type, you have to have a big IA and a big IB. And then all the way down at the bottom, this type O male, he's got type O blood, so therefore he has to have 2 copies of little I. So those are the easy ones. And you'll notice without even really having to think, I have filled in probably over half of my blanks. So then what you want to do is you want to go back and try to fill in the rest. Do the easy ones first. Then you go back through and you try to figure out the missing blanks. But when you do that, you want to focus on anybody in the family who is homozygous recessive. And we only had one of those in this family, this type O person. And that's really helpful because if a child is little I, what do you automatically know about both of his parents? That's right. They had to have little I. Okay? So I filled those in. Now, let's keep moving up. So here's a woman. We now know she has a big IA and a little I. It looks like she probably got this big IA from her dad right here. Is there any way this big IA could have come from mom? The answer to that is no. This cannot be a big IA because then the blood type would not be type B. So this big IA had to have come from dad, which means this little I has to come from mom. So I now know that mom right here has a little I. I can use the same logic for this girl. See, big IB looks like it probably came from mom. That means, well, I guess we should say, is it possible that this big IB could have come from the dad? No, because this is not AB blood type. So if the big IB came from mom, that means this gene had to come from dad. Now, could it be the big IA? Could this be a big IA? No, because then the blood type would be incorrect. There's no way dad has a big IB. So if we know that this is not a big IB, and it's certainly not a big IA, the only other possibility is little I. Okay, and then same logic here. Big IA came from dad. That means this gene came from mom. It's got to be one of these two. It can't be the big IB for obvious reasons, so therefore it has to be little I. Now, you will run into situations in pedigrees like this where you might not be able to solve all of the missing genes. Sometimes there's not enough information to know for certain what the answer is. So, like for this girl, she definitely got a big IA from one of her parents. She could have gotten a big IA from mom and a big IA from dad. She could have, but it's also possible that she got a big IA and a little I, and there's no way for us to know. And the same thing is true for this lady. She married into this family, so we don't know anything about her parents. They would be here. We don't know about her parents. We don't have any way to know whether she's big IA, or maybe she could be big IA, little I. And so sometimes a question mark is really the only response that you can do, because sometimes it's impossible to know. Okay, let's look at a couple of examples from the textbook. Um, Here we have once again, three generations in a family, and the trait that we are tracking, the trait that this father has, this mother has, this daughter, son, daughter, daughter, the ones that are shaded in, the trait that they have is a human trait called widow's peak. And that's a real thing. It sounds made up, but it's a real thing. And it means that when you pull back on the hairline, right up at the forehead, there's a little, almost looks like Dracula, in the old horror movies, a little point in the hairline. If you don't have widow's peak, it looks like this. You can see this. These girls are sisters. Um, these are their parents, and then this girl does have widow peak, so she is shaded in, and the girl that does not have widow peak is not shaded in. And so the question that we have to answer for this one is widow's peak a dominant trait, or is it a recessive trait? Well, you can answer that pretty easily by just looking at this family. Dad had widow's peak, mom had widow's peak, and one of the daughters has it. The other daughter does not. If widow's peak was caused by a recessive allele, then that would mean this dad would be little w, and the mom would be little w, little w. There would be no big W's, right? And so how would you possibly get a girl without widow's peak? You know, um, if both of these parents were homozygous recessive, how could this girl show a dominant trait? So basically what that means is having widow's peak must be the dominant trait, and not having widow's peak must be the recessive. So once I make that determination, and that is the correct determination, I automatically know that anyone who has widow's peak has to have at least one big W. So I went ahead and filled in for the whole family. Anybody who is shaded in has to have at least one big W for widow's peak. But if you're not shaded in, like this girl here, then you must be little w, homozygous recessive. And so the only thing that's left to do then is to try to fill in the second gene on all of these widow's peak folks. So you notice, like, for example, here we have a mom with widow's peak, but one of her kids, her daughter, is homozygous recessive. So that means both dad and mom had to have little w, so I know I've got to put a little w here. Same thing for this dad way up here, because he had two kids without widow's peak, homozygous recessive, therefore he has to have a little w. And both of these parents had widow's peak, but remember they produced a daughter without it. So this has to be a little w, and this has to be a little w. And I was able to figure out every single gene, every genotype of every individual in this family, excuse me, except for this girl. She's either big W, or she could possibly have gotten a big W from one parent and a little w from the other parent. And there's really no way to know. So we could put a question mark, or we could just do it this way. Okay, let's take a look at another example from the textbook. Most of you will remember doing a PTC tasting test in my class. If you're a face-to-face student, we did this back before Christmas, and we determined everyone's phenotype, whether they could taste PTC or not. And here we're looking at 3 generations of a family. Looks like it's those same 2 sisters. And so we're looking at 3 generations in that family and tracking whether or not the folks could taste PTC. So the question at the bottom says, is the inability to taste PTC, a PTC non-taster, is that a dominant trait or a recessive trait? Well, chances are you remember this from class, and you probably remember that the little t, those were the non-tasters. But let's see if that is supported by the data that we have on this pedigree. So it looks like they have shaded in anybody in this family who cannot taste PTC. I would have done it the other way, but that's how they set this up. So remember, this is a non-taster. We got 2 non-taster brothers here, but as far as these 2 girls, one of them is a non-taster, the other is a taster. You can see that face that she's making because the PTC tastes bitter. So could that be a dominant trait? Well, let's think about that. So think about it this way. If non-tasting is a dominant trait, that means this girl, who's a non-taster, would have to have 1 dominant allele. All right. But both of her parents are tasters, so they would be homozygous recessive. In other words, this girl would have to have a big T, and yet both of her parents are little t, so that couldn't be, right? There's no way. So therefore, we know, just looking at the mom and the dad and the 2 girls, we know for a fact that the inability to taste PTC is a recessive trait. Anybody who is a non-taster has to be little t. And that means everybody else in this family, the ones that are not shaded in, remember, those are the ones who can taste PTC. They have to have at least 1 big T. And so your job in this case would be to try to figure out the second gene of all these folks who are tasters. Are they big T, or big T, little t? Well, look at this couple. They produced 2 non-taster boys. Little t. That means dad had to have a little t, mom had to have a little t. If a parent is little t, then all of the kids are going to get a little t. So we know this girl has to have a little t. And I was able to go through and fill in all the genes for the folks in this family. The only mistake, I just noticed this, and there's too late for me to fix it now, but this girl right here, we don't know for sure that she is big T, because she could have gotten a big T from her dad and a little t from her mother. So this really should be a question here. Big T, or big T, little t, much like what I put for this lady right here. See, she could have gotten a big T from her dad, a big T from her mom, or she could have gotten a big T from one parent and a little T from the other. Okay, so now I've made that correction for this girl here who is a taster and could be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. Okay, let's look at another one for practice. And once again, we have multiple generations. Let's see, we have three generations in a family. Each generation has been designated with a Roman numeral. So Roman numeral 1 is the first generation, and then we have the second generation all the way across, and the third generation. And each person in this family has been designated with a number. So if I referred to individual 2-1, that would be Roman numeral 2, person number 1. If I referred to person 3-8, that would be Roman numeral 3, person number 8. So we'll be talking about this person right here. Or person 1-4 would be Roman numeral 1, person 4. Okay, so your task, and what I want you to do at this point is I want you, in just a moment, I want you to pause the video, and then I want you to look at the screen, look at this image, and I want you to answer question 1 first. Is the trait that this girl has, this boy has, and this papa up here, is that trait a dominant trait, or is it a recessive trait? And they didn't put it on the worksheet here, but is it a sex-linked trait, or is it autosomal? So figure that out first, okay? And then I want you to figure out the genotypes of each of these 4 individuals. 3-3 would be this lady right here. 2-1 would be this lady. 1-1 is this man right here. And what was the other? 2-4 would be this lady. So I want you to figure out the genotypes of each of these 4, and then I want you to answer question 2. That's the final thing that I want you to do. Do that with the video paused, and then you can unpause the video and check your answers. Okay, let's see how you did. Let's see if you were able to answer all of those questions. So there's kind of an unwritten question here. First of all, we need to figure out, is the trait an autosomal trait, or is it a sex-linked trait? So let's just kind of see if it could possibly be sex-linked. Let's assume that everybody who is shaded in this family, there's only 3 of them, let's assume that those are the folks who have a sex-linked trait. Let's just use hemophilia as an example. So that means this would be a lady with hemophilia, X little h, X little h. Of course, she would have to get one of those little h's from her mom. So maybe her mom was a carrier, even though her mom clearly did not have hemophilia, but she could have been a carrier. But that means the other little h would have to come from her dad. That means this would have to be a little h right here. And we know that's not so, because if that was a little h, this would be a male with hemophilia, and he would be shaded in. And he's not. So this cannot be a sex-linked trait, because if it's a sex-linked trait, then any woman who shows the trait, like this lady, her father would have to show the trait as well, and he does not. Therefore, it is not a sex-linked trait, it is autosomal. So how about the question right here? Is the trait dominant or recessive? So let's just see if it could possibly be dominant. Could it be that everyone who is shaded in has at least one copy of a dominant allele. I'm just using A, the letter A, as an example. But could it be that this person is shaded in because they have a big A? And the answer to that is no. Because notice, for both of these kids, their parents, here's mom, here's dad, are not shaded in. So they would have to be little a, and the only folks that would be shaded in would be the folks that have at least one big A. Well, where did that big A come from? Mom doesn't have a big A, dad doesn't have a big A, so there'd be no way for this kid to have a big A. So therefore, we now know the answer. This is not a dominant trait, it is a recessive trait. And since I know that, I need to change the way I labeled my genes. I can't use big A for the shaded in people, because whatever trait they have is a recessive trait. I now know it's a recessive trait. So that means the shaded in people are going to have to be my little a's. It's the unshaded in people, this guy, and this lady, and this guy, and this guy. Those are the ones that have at least one big A. Everybody in this family, which is most of the folks, everybody in this family who's not shaded in has to have at least one big A. And I now know this to be true because it's not a sex-linked trait, it's not a dominant trait, it's a recessive trait. And so the folks who are shaded in, who have the trait, have to be homozygous recessive. So let's fill in the genotypes of these four individuals. 3-3, we've already kind of figured that one out. They're shaded in, so they have to be little a, little a. All right, now what about person 2-1? Let's think about that one. So this is a female. She's not shaded in, so she's got to have at least one what? Big A. Yeah. What about the other gene, her second letter? Could it be another big A? Well, look at her father, little a, little a. He doesn't have a big A. So he has to pass a little a to his daughter. That's all he has. Therefore, she has to be heterozygous. She has to have a big A because she's not shaded in, and she has to have a little a because of her dad. Okay? 1-1. Well, again, we've already kind of figured this one out. This is a person who is shaded in, therefore they have to be little a, little a. And then finally, 2-4, Roman numeral 2, person 4 is this person. You can see I've already filled it in. I knew this had to be a big A because it's not shaded in. It can't be little a, little a because it's not shaded in. But I know there has to be a little a because look at this kid and look at this kid. You know, anytime you have a child that's little a, that means dad has to have a little a and mom has to have a little a. So I know the big A is right because it's not shaded in, and I know the little a is right because of these kids right here. Okay. How can you know for sure that individual 2-3, that's this guy, and individual 2-4, that's his wife right here, how do I know for sure that they are heterozygous? Well, it's pretty simple. I know they both have to have a big A because they're not shaded in. If they were little a, they would be shaded in. So I know that both this man and this woman have to have a big A. And I know that they both have a little a because of their kids. You see? Well, and actually, for this guy right here, there's two reasons why I know he's heterozygous. He has to get a little a from his dad. Okay. But even if I didn't know that information, I could just look at his daughter and his son. And if a kid is little a, that means both the father has to have the little a and the mom. So that takes care of all the questions on this pedigree. And hopefully, now that we've looked at about 4 different examples, hopefully you've got a pretty good feel for how to do pedigree analysis. And I'm right at 30 minutes. That's a good place to stop. Y'all have a great day.